What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. This is part of a series where I focus on a specific director and rank that director's work from worst to best. Done such directors in the past such as Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, Christopher Nolan, Wes Anderson, and many more directors. You guys can check out those directors and those many more directors I mentioned in the director playlist down below. But guys, you clicked on this video so you know it. This time around I'm focusing on Oliver Stone's films and ranking them from worst to best. Now, I'm filming this in September of 2023, and as of the filming of this video, he has done technically 20 films, but this list will only be including 19 of them. And the reason why I mention this is because his first feature-length film, Seizure, is very, very hard to find. In fact, I couldn't find it anywhere, so that's why I'm only going to be doing 19 films that he's done. And I'll be ranking it from 19 being his worst to 1 being the best, and of course, my humble opinion. And it's worth mentioning that this will not include any TV movies, music videos, TV shows, none of that. Specifically, his feature-length films, 19 being the worst, 1 being the best, and of course, my humble opinion. And I'll be very curious to see your guys' ranking of his work down below. But guys, enough exposition. Let's get started. So, bottom of the barrel, my number 19, we have Savages. Yeah, I did not like this movie, which is a shame because I like the cast quite a bit, but my goodness, this was a huge misfire. Very, very clumsy in terms of the execution of the storytelling, the plotting, the characters, just everything about this movie just wasn't interesting. Even the filmmaking just really wasn't interesting. I didn't like this movie in the slightest, and yeah, that's why it's my number 19. Next up, my number 18. This was one of his more recent movies that I saw, even though it did come out 40 plus years ago. But my number 18 is The Hand. So The Hand is one of those interesting things where it starts off very fascinating. I liked the first act quite a bit, but then as the movie progressed, it got worse and worse. And by the end, I really didn't care about the movie. It's a shame because the premise on paper is something that should be good, but the actual execution left a lot to be desired. I feel like they should have gone full art house or they should have gone full horror, but it felt like it was somewhere in between. And because of that, you feel the inconsistency for sure, especially by the end. So I don't know. I can see why some people might like this. Like I'm sure that there might be like a cult classic status about this movie, but for me, I didn't really care for it. And for me, I think about the movie and I just say, what a shame, because that first act, as I mentioned, was just really good. But the rest of the movie, not so much. But yeah, The Hand is my number 18. Next up, my number 17, we have Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. So I like the acting. I liked the fact that Michael Douglas returned. I also did think that Shia LaBeouf was, for the most part, pretty good. And I also like Carey Mulligan. The problem is that this movie has a heavy focus on the romance between Carey Mulligan and Shia LaBeouf. And it's very, very, very poorly done. Like watching it just felt like a chore, honestly. It's a shame too because I do like the first one. I think the first one is quite good, but here, no, not good. This is an unnecessary sequel that should have been really good, especially because it came out shortly after the 2008 financial crisis. But it's like one of those things where it's like it wasn't able to capitalize on that opportunity. It wasn't. Instead, it fell very flat and it felt like a much, much lesser version of Wall Street that came out in the 80s. So it's a shame. It's a shame. And I think that my disappointment has a large part as to why it's towards the bottom of this list. It's not a terrible, terrible movie, but it is a very, very disappointing, average kind of feeling of a movie. But yeah, that's why it's my number 17. Next up, my number 16, we have Heaven and Earth. So this is one of those movies where I'm sure that a lot of people have this higher up on their list. I've heard that there are people out there that really, really dig this movie. I will say this, I like the cinematography, I liked the locations, I liked the score, and I think the performances are good too. But where this movie faltered for me personally is that I thought that the storytelling just wasn't really that good. And I wasn't a fan of the directing either. I thought that Oliver Stone's directing here felt like it was a mismatch with the material. Like, I feel like the story itself, in the hands of another director, maybe even just another writer, would have benefited highly. But as it stands, it's one of those issues where on the screen, the visual presentation is good, but everything else about it just felt like a mess. Now, again, I know I'm in the minority with that because I'm sure that I'm going to see a lot of people have this higher up on their list, and I can totally respect that. But for me, Heaven and Earth, I felt kind of disappointed by it, unfortunately. I wanted to like it, but alas, here we are. It's my number 16. And next up, we have my number 15, which is World Trade Center. So World Trade Center, it's interesting because on paper, it's something that should be good, especially because it's focusing on firefighters during this period of time. but unfortunately, the actual execution was kind of like disappointing to mixed. What's more frustrating though is that it came out the same year as United 93, and when you're watching both of these films, you can clearly see which is the better, United 93. And I would highly recommend you watch United 93. If you have to choose between the two, watch United 93. If you're like myself and trying to watch all of Oliver Stone's films, by all means, watch World Trade Center. But that's really the only reason I can see to watch this movie. I can see why some people might like it, but overall, I just found this to be a movie that was kind of a slodge to get through, especially by the end. The third act, I felt like was kind of like, eh. But again, I can respect if people have this higher up on their list. But for me, I have it as my number 15. Next up, my number 14, we have another history-based movie. My number 14 is W. Dot. So this movie is about George W. Bush, played by Josh Brolin, and I gotta say, I like the casting. I think the cast is quite interesting. The acting itself is good, and I do think that there are spurts of intrigue of this movie. But overall, I felt kind of about this movie. I know that there are some people out there that really like this movie because on Letterboxd, the reviews are all over the place. There are some people that have this as like a 5 out of 5, and there's some people that have it as a 1 out of 5. I have it more in the middle, or closer to the middle, I should say, because I have it as like a 2 out of 5. I found it to be kind of but again, there are spurts of intrigue, and I do like it more than World Trade Center slightly, but overall, it's just kind of a misfire, an Oliver Stone misfire. But again, you can see why some people might have this up higher, and I really am curious to see where this is going to be on people's ranking list. I really am. But as it stands, W. Dot is my number 14. Next up, my number 13, we have his latest movie, Snowdown. So Snowdown came out in 2016, and I did not see it in theaters. It seemed intriguing enough, but it wasn't intriguing enough for me to watch it at that time in theaters. So I think I finally saw it a couple years ago, as a part of doing this director ranking list. And I felt mixed about it. I liked it more than these other entries, obviously, because of the placement. But I do think that given the true life story of this, that in itself is fascinating. So I just feel like when you see and read about the real life story and then you see the execution of this story unfold, it leaves me personally as a viewer frustrated because they could have done so much more with the material. But I left feeling this, feeling quite cold after watching this movie, but it's still somewhat competently made and it is well acted for sure. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is good, of course. But yeah, not much more to say about this movie, unfortunately. But that was my number 13. Next up, my number 12. I have a lot to say about this movie. My number 12 is Alexander. So Alexander has 4 or 5 cuts. There's the theatrical cut, the director's cut, the revisited cut, the final cut, something like that. There's so many cuts. There's so many versions out there. And I'll say this. I got the DVD out from my local library, and the only versions that they had was either the theatrical or the director's cut. And upon reading up on the movies, like the 2 different versions, I decided to go with the theatrical cut because apparently the director's cut takes out a lot of homosexual material, which I thought was kind of odd that they would cut that out because, this is the story of Alexander, right? So I was like, I'm going to watch the theatrical cut, and if I like the theatrical cut, I'll watch the revisited or final cut or whatever. After watching the theatrical cut, I feel really mixed about this movie, but there are things that I did like about this film quite a bit. I liked Vangelis' score. The score is amazing. Really, really amazing stuff. The costume design, the production design, it is a handsomely mounted film. Like, it looks really, really good. And I do like the acting, even though I will say many of these cast members are quite miscast. I love Anthony Hopkins. If you don't know by now, he is one of my favorite actors of all time. But his narration, his performance just really felt in the wrong movie. And the same could be said with Colin Farrell and Angelina Jolie, who I usually, like I said, I don't usually talk about casting, but it's something that it was so noticeable that I can't help but talk about it. Like, Colin Farrell and Angelina Jolie are a year apart, yet they're supposed to be playing mother and son. And I didn't buy it for a second. It literally looks like they could be dating. And based on their age difference, it's like they could be. So it felt very, very odd, these casting choices, especially because even over the progress of the movie, you're supposed to buy the fact that, she's getting older and everything, but she looks the same. And then Colin Farrell is aging. And so it's like by the time I would say by the end of the second act, they look like they're on the same, like clearly the same age. It's so frustrating. It's like little things like that. It's like really, but I did like Val Kilmer. I thought Val Kilmer's performance was interesting, but just my goodness, the casting again. I like Oliver Stone, I do, but some of his decisions in his movies just leave me mind blown, and not in a good way. So Alexander, I don't know. Maybe I'll revisit it at some point, but for now, I really don't have the urge because I also think that the third act did make some decisions in terms of the cinematography that left me scratching my head. Like the color palette turns into like a pink red hueish, and it felt very distracting more so than like artistic. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Like I said, you can hear the frustration. You can hear the conflict in my voice, I'm sure. So I don't know. Maybe I'll revisit this at some point. I don't know. But as it stands, I respect some of this film. Other aspects, not so much. And yeah, so I have it as my number 12. I knew I was going to go on a rant. So that was my number 12. Next up, my number 11, we have Salvador. So this movie stars James Wood, and he's really good. He is quite good in this film. He gives a really, really good performance. And that's the thing that sticks out about this movie, the performances. I really liked it. I think also the story itself is intriguing. Like, I like the premise. But overall, I thought this movie was just okay. I really don't have much more to say about it. I liked it more than Alexander, I can say that much. But it was overall, by the end of this movie, I found myself saying, I appreciate the filmmaking, but I don't really have much more to say about it. It feels very standard issue, which is a shame given the premise. But again, not a bad movie, not a good movie, somewhere in between. It's okay. It is what it is. And yeah, I have Salvador as my number 11. And next up, we get into the top 10 guys. I'm loving it. My number 10, we have Any Given Sunday. So this is a sports film, and I'm not going to lie, going into this film, I was worried about the length because it's nearly 3 hours. But I got to say, despite it definitely being overlong, I do think that the story is fascinatingly told. I do like Oliver Stone's directing here. I do like the acting. Al Pacino gives a great performance. If you are especially into sports, specifically football, I would definitely recommend this film because it is a unique perspective of the game, and it's something that made me happy watching because, again, going into it, I see the length, and then I think, when I think sports, I think of how, those kind of movies tend to be quite predictable and just, kind of like, But here, it's quite well done. It's competently made. It's well acted. Yes, it's overlong, but it is something that I definitely would recommend you watch at least once, especially as a sports fan. That's why I have it as my number 10. Next up, my number 9, we have Natural Born Killers. So, Natural Born Killers, it's interesting because I know a lot of people that probably have this in their top 3, and I can respect that. And truthfully, Natural Born Killers, I almost put a little bit below the number 9 slot, like number 11 or 12. But I started thinking about it more and more, and despite feeling mixed about this movie, I have this higher up on the list because I do genuinely think that the writing and the acting are so passionate that you can't help but have certain things seared into your memory. Like, I saw this movie a couple years ago, and I still have some of those images stuck in my head. It's definitely a thing where the premise itself we've seen done before, but how it's executed via Oliver Stone's directing is something that does make for a interesting experience. Do I love this movie? No, I do not. I think it's a mess. Genuinely speaking, I think it's a mess. But it is a fascinating mess. And that's why I have it higher up on the list. Because again, I do think that it is a film that you should experience at least once. Whether the style is going to work for you or not, that's definitely something that, flip a coin, you'll decide. But yeah, that's my number 9. Speaking of style, my number 8 is U-Turn. The stars Sean Penn and Jennifer Lopez. And when you hear those two actors, you would not think that they would work well together. But I gotta say, U-Turn, it's something. I found myself throughout the entire film not only really engaged, but fascinated by the directing. I mean, there are so many twists and turns in this movie that it's worth watching at least for that. Some of the editing choices are, how should I put it, frustrating, but that is also kind of an Oliver Stone trademark, 90s onwards. I mean, even Natural Born Killers, I forgot to mention that. There are some editing choices in that movie that I was like, what the heck is this? But U-Turn, it's similarly done, where the editing is just so haphazard and so all over the place at times. But it also makes sense given the context of U-Turn, where it's like you're following this lead character as he himself feels out of place and feels like very frantic nature on like what's going on and everything. So it does match, but it is sometimes still kind of distracting. But overall, I would definitely say watch U-Turn. It surprised me. It is quite good, and Jennifer Lopez and Sean Penn, their chemistry together is it's something. I'll just say that. And Nick Nolte, what a performance. What a performance. But yeah, that's why I have it as my number 8, U-Turn. Next up, my number 7, we have The Doors. So this stars Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison. And this was another film that for some reason going into it, I felt like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But right away, it was one of those situations where I was like, no, I think I actually might like it. And as it progressed, I liked it more and more. I really dug this film. I think that Val Kilmer did a great job. The soundtrack is very catchy, obviously. I really like the cinematography. There's just a lot of things to appreciate about this film. I do think that it does kind of fall into some biopic cliches, but overall, it's very well made. It is. Didn't love it, but it's well crafted enough for me to say, like, yeah, it's worth the time to watch. It is almost 2.5 hours, but for the most part, I don't really have issues with the runtime. But I would definitely say watch it. And yeah, it's by The Doors. It's my number 7. Next up, my number 6, we have Wall Street. So you see where Wall Street is in terms of the placement of this list. I have Wall Street as number 6, and I have Wall Street Money Never Sleeps at number 17. So you can clearly see the big quality difference. What I'll say about this is that with Wall Street being my number 6, I've only seen it one time. I saw it a couple months ago, but I really dug it. I'm kind of kicking myself that I put off watching it for so long, because watching Wall Street, you can clearly see that it inspired such films as like The Wolf of Wall Street and even some of Scorsese's later efforts. It is a film that you can see where some people might misinterpret about capitalism, how it's in fact a film that is critiquing capitalism, but many people look at Wall Street similar to Wolf of Wall Street and say, no, it's embracing it, man. And it's like, not really. You should probably get a microscope and just put it under the lens and actually dissect this film, because it's not doing that. And I do think that it going down the rabbit hole of dissecting capitalism through Michael Douglas's character and Charlie Sheen's character is fascinating in itself. And I do like the dynamic between the two of them. Not a fan of the romance of this film, and that is something that is apparent with Oliver Stone's filmography, where the romances in his films just aren't really that well done. It could just be that he's not interested in them, but it's like, if you're not interested in them, why have them almost, I feel like. So, but overall, I like Wall Street. I do, and I think that the third act in particular, it's good stuff. I can see myself rewatching this film, and yeah, that's why it was my number 6. And now we get into the nitty-gritty, guys, the top 5. So, my number 5, we have Talk Radio. This film, holy cow. I saw this last week, and I went into it with low expectations, but I came out of it saying, wow, that is a really good film. It starts right off where the directing keeps you glued to the screen. The directing, the lead performance, the intensity of this film is palpable, despite mostly it just being dialogue. I really dug this film. I heard that it's on Blu-ray, that it was like a limited run, so I don't know if I can find the Blu-ray at some point, but I definitely want to own this on and add it to my collection, because it is really good. If you've been sleeping on this film, watch it. It is definitely an underrated 1980s film. Highly recommend you check out Talk Radio. And yeah, that's why I made it into my top 5. Watch it. But yeah, it's my number 5. Next up, my number 4, we have Nixon, the director's cut. So Nixon, similarly to Alexander, Nixon and Alexander were two films that have been on my radar for like over a decade. Because I would always see it at my local library. And the thing with Nixon was I always saw that they had the director's cut available, but not the theatrical cut. So I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to watch the director's cut. And I liked it. It's over 3 hours, but it's really fascinating. Anthony Hopkins, I know I mentioned him earlier with Alexander and how I wasn't a big fan of his performance in that film. Here, Nixon, he did an incredible job. I loved his performance as Nixon. He did such a great job with all these nuances, these tics that he has. Just a very lively performance. When he's on screen, which is throughout most of the duration of the film, you can't help but be caught up with everything that you're experiencing. And also the directing here is really, really strong. I mean, it's over 3 hours, but you're consistently engaged with everything that they're throwing at you. Is it historically accurate? Not really. Not really at all, but it is something where, because of the filmmaking, because of all the passion on screen, you can't help but get caught up with this conspiracy-ridden film, and it's very effective filmmaking. And that's what I'm saying. Whenever I talk about biopics, I always say that, if it's based on a true story and it's not historically accurate, you best hope that you have great filmmaking latched onto this film. Otherwise, it's going to feel very eh. Thankfully, Nixon has incredible filmmaking, and yeah, that's why it's my number 4. I can definitely see myself revisiting this film and hopefully even buying it on Blu-ray. But yeah, Nixon's my number 4. Next up, my number 3, we have Born on the 4th of July. This is a very, very sad film, but an incredibly well done film. I love Tom Cruise's performance. He did a great job. I think he probably would have won Best Actor that year if it wasn't for the fact that Daniel Day-Lewis had a performance that year with My Left Foot. But what a film! I really, really liked Born on the 4th of July. Like, I felt moved after watching this film, because watching it gives you a glimpse on what these individual veterans must have gone through, specifically ones where it's like, they lose leg. It's like, that's got to be a lot to deal with, and just visually seeing it, and then also internally feeling like you're Tom Cruise's character with all that he's going through. You can't help but get caught up with this character's journey. And Oliver Stone's directing here is great. John Williams' score is a bit syrupy at times, but for the most part, I loved it. I liked the way it was shot. It's just a very, very compelling, well-crafted film. If you've been sleeping on Born on the 4th of July, which I know I was, please stop sleeping on this film. Watch it. It is really, really good. I was sleeping on it too, and I gotta say, I'm glad that I did this director ranking list, because otherwise I probably would have put off watching this for another decade, just like I did with Nixon, just like I did with Wall Street and other films of his nature. So please watch it. But yeah, that's my number 3. And it's worth noting that Born on the 4th of July was going to be my number 2. But I decided to rewatch my number 2. And my number 2 is Platoon. So, funny story, I knew I was going to have to revisit Platoon because I saw it 9 years ago. But I looked it up and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try to watch it on the 9-year anniversary that I saw this film, which was September 8th of 2014. Well, I'm looking it up on Letterboxd on September 7th, and it turns out that, holy cow, I watched this film September 8th, 2014. So I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to watch it the next day. So I'm filming this video September 9th, and I watched it September 8th of 2023. So 9 years exactly later, I decided to revisit Platoon. And I'm glad that I revisited it because I liked it even more. I liked it the first time 9 years ago. I thought it was good, but I think that I just maybe either wasn't in the right mindset or just not at the right maturity level to really appreciate Platoon. Because watching it now, the tragic nature, the sadness, the gut-wrenching brutality, all the searingly difficult imagery to experience really just hit hard this time around. Like, I think it did the first time, but I don't know. I feel like just at that age, maybe I just wanted more action, and this film isn't really about that. It's more about the overall effect that war has on individuals. And I think that seeing it now with where I'm at in terms of how I feel about the war genre, it's something that really hit home even harder. I think that Charlie Sheen gives a great performance. Tom Berenger also does great. William Dafoe. I mean, this is one of those films that it has so much iconic imagery for a reason. It's very hard-hitting. It's hard to watch. It's very well acted. It's got a great score when it does hit into the landscape. It's a very, very well-crafted film. I can definitely see why it won Best Picture. It is very effective at what it sets out to do. And the fact that, I forgot to even mention this, the fact that Oliver Stone is a Vietnam vet, a film like Platoon and a film like Born on the 4th of July, it makes it all the more tragic when you're watching these two films and seeing it from his perspective, like someone that actually, went through this kind of stuff. So yeah, Platoon, it's a great film. If you've been sleeping on it, highly, highly recommend you watch it. It is very effective. And yeah, that's why it's my number 2. Next up, my number 1. This might be a hot take, but I don't care because I love it. My number 1 is JFK. So JFK, it is an outstanding film. I mentioned about Nixon and about how that film, it isn't exactly 100% historically accurate, not even close, but how because of the filmmaking, you can't help but get caught up with it. JFK takes it one step further. By the end of JFK, you can't help but get caught up in the conspiracy theory and say, oh wow, yeah, maybe it was just more than one person. Like, holy cow, like maybe he was a patsy. Like, it's insanity. That's the power of filmmaking. Oliver Stone's directing here is just, it is on another level. He puts you in the perspective of Jim Morrison, well, Jim Garrison, I should say, not Morrison, Jim Garrison, played by Kevin Costner, and he puts him in your shoes, and you can't help but get caught up in this journey that he goes through. Wonderful cast. Joe Pesci's in it, Tommy Lee Jones, many more, Gary Oldman. John Williams gives one of his best scores. The cinematography utilizes many, many, many different film stocks. It's an overall very, very effective film. I mean, Oliver Stone takes out all the bells and whistles, everything that he has at his disposal, and he gives us a 3-hour film that breezes by. There's a theatrical cut, there's a director's cut. Watch either or. I know when I first saw this film, I saw the director's cut. And I think that maybe my second viewing, I also watched the director's cut. But the only ones that are available, it seems, on not physical media, on streaming platforms are the theatrical cut. So the last couple of viewings, I've seen the theatrical cut, and that's amazing too. I don't have a physical copy because I was hoping that it would come back and print like the Blu-ray. But it turns out, as of the filming of this video a couple weeks ago, they did announce that this is going to be coming out in 4K. So you best believe that when JFK comes out in 4K, I'm going to be picking that up because I love it. In my eyes, it is Oliver Stone's masterpiece. And yeah, that's why I have it as my number one. But yeah, guys, so at the end of these videos, I usually try to talk about the director and if I like them or not. And I will say that overall, Oliver Stone makes many movies that are mixed bags. But one thing I really appreciate about all of his films is how he's very hard-hitting. He is very much so about trying to immerse us as viewers, even if he does make some artistic decisions that don't always work for viewers. But I do like the fact that he is all about dissecting war. He's about dissecting the politics of war, politics in general. He has a lot of fascination with larger-than-life individuals, and I think that it works for the most part. Again, not all of his films work. Not all of them. That's just for me personally. I can see why some people might have it where it's like all of his work does work for them. But for me, he has the good, the bad, and the ugly pretty much. He has movies that I think are really, really bad. He has movies that I think are quite mixed. And then he has movies that I think are genuinely great films. And I think that the fact that he consistently was able to make films throughout his career and do so with varying quality, it just goes to show that given the right material, though, he knows how to really speak, in terms of like his vocal lens as a director. And by that, I mean that the films that he's really, really fascinated by, you can tell. And then the movies that he's not so much, you can also really tell. Although I say all this, and apparently Heaven and Earth is the film that he's most proud of, so what do I know? But yeah, I like Oliver Stone overall, even if he doesn't exactly always hit his mark. I still really appreciate his style as a filmmaker and how he goes for it. He's an ambitious director, and yeah, curious to see if he'll be doing anything anytime soon, or if he's retired and just sticking with documentaries. But yeah, guys, that is my thoughts on Oliver Stone and my ranking of such. Let me know your ranking on Oliver Stone's films down below. And as always, hit the subscription, notification bell, follow me down Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.